All right, welcome back. We are copy data, and we also created some addition the Express application that we created earlier. And we're also going to create some static data sources for layout purposes only. And what we're also going to do is we're going to create something called a book repository, which allows us to link our data model to the static data source. And this is all in prep for what we're going to create. But we're going to do this by creating a feature, I should say module here, feature module, that basically allows us to share our data with the rest of the application. That is the only thing that we're going to be doing this time around. It's going to be hopefully a shorter video than the other ones. Let's see how it goes. All right, so starting off, back to this, I'm just going to kick off control backtick, and just to show us where we are at, we're going to do let's go to the client folder here and do an ng serve --open. Remember that what that does, it creates a connection. First it recompiles everything, and it creates a connection with our default browser and the application framework that we've been creating. And what this does for us is it creates this kind of thing. So far we've got the same services that we had before, kind of a very simple way of doing stuff. Right, product, services, contact. Notice that there is no logging in, logging out right now, but these are all Angular views. Again, the back end right now is not being used. We're going to add to these views in the next video, chances are. All right, let's continue now. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to build out our data model. So we're going to create a brand new folder in here. In the source app folder, we're going to make a brand new folder called model. So new folder. We're going to make a new folder called model. The model folder. And inside the model folder, okay, this is where we're going to make our new new book model. All right, so we're going to go into new file. And we're going to call this, this is the long version, so we're going to say book.model.ts. Okay, so that's how it looks. We're going to export our class, which is the book class, not book model, but book class. Sometimes our code hinting goes a little wild. And what we want is inside the constructor object, we want to create a bunch of public properties. Remember how we did public properties in the constructor? We use the keyword public, and what that does is it saves us from doing this dot ID is equal to the ID, and this dot so and so is equal to so and so. TypeScript gives us a shortcut for this. Okay, but first of all, a nice thing to do would be, let's split screen for a second, and let's go into our previous model from our Express. So we have models. We have our book model. And I want to put this on this side this time. And this is our previous book model. We want to basically keep the same structure. Otherwise, when we actually finally connect to our back end, we'll have problems, right? So first of all, remember that our ID is the first thing. So we're going to make a public ID and make sure that it's called, again, underscore ID. That's the right thing to do. We'll make it optional. The question mark says it's optional. And we'll make it a number. We'll also say that our name is also optional, and it'll be a string. We'll make a public author, and that will also be a string. We can see we're just following up the, make sure it's optional there as well. And the reason why it needs to be optional is because we're not initializing it in any other way, right? We're also going to make a public published, which is going to be optional in a string, and a public description, which is also a string. Finally, we're going to make a public price, which is going to be a number. All right, so that is our model, and kind of almost like identical to what we have here. So this would be our data model on the back end. We're not going to connect to that yet, but we're doing it here. We're preparing to make our model identical on the front end So that connects to the back end. Now you might say, wait, there's some duplication here. And the answer is, you're right, but can you imagine, in this case, if the Angular site is literally sitting on a different server than the back end. So you need this kind of twice, one for the back end, so it can connect to Mongo, and the other one for the front end, so we can format our data properly. Remember, the front end is back end agnostic. It doesn't know what's on the back end, right? And same thing with the back end. The back end wouldn't know anything about the front end. It doesn't know. Eventually, the back end is just going to serve up JSON data, and so it's not going to know what's consuming it on the front end. So that's why we need these two. All right, so that's the first part. We saved it, and even though we saved it and we created it, we have a bit of an issue here. It says, hey, by the way, there's a problem with uppercase and blah, blah, and it says, disable the rule use variable name. And you can do that with TS linking. You can disable any kind of warnings that come up like this. I don't recommend it all the time. Usually it's there for a reason, but our ID is literally called _ID, and that's why we need to put it this way. Otherwise, we'll have connection issues later. Okay, so that's the first part. All right, so now that we've made our model, what we want to do is in the same model folder, we want to create a static data source. And what this is going to be, think about this as why we're saying static. This data source is actually something that's going to not include any actual data, but just for formatting purposes so that we can see what our data would look like if we were connecting to the back end. All right, so this is kind of a middle step, if you will, to everything else we're doing. Let's do this now. So in model, make a new file. We're going to call it static.datasource.ts, very similar to what we had in the PowerPoint slides. And we're going to import injectable. And injectable is kind of we'll see in a second here what it is. Angular core. If I can type at Angular core properly. Angular/core interface. It's an injectable interface. And what the injectable interface does is it forces the class that uses this injectable interface to have an observable. That's what it kind of does. Okay, so we'll talk about this in a second and what observable is. We're also going to import book, right? That's why I have to create the book object first, from /book model. All right, so that's what where that comes from. We get a book from the book model, and we're going to import our observable. Again, that's another interface, and then from RxJS. Okay, so React.js is what that is. Reactive JavaScript. And why is that giving me a bit of an error? It says all imports and import declarations are unused. Yeah, of course. We're not there yet. All right, and then we're going to make this injectable. Again, this is activatable because of the injectable keyword that we're using, the injectable interface. And this is a descriptor. That's what it is. So it describes the class, export class, static data source. Okay. And I'm going to put this on different lines. I like formatting my class this way, but you may like it in different ways. Also, the name static data source got changed because of my cute little code formatting. Data source with a capital S. Don't know why that happened. And let us do some private, and we're going to call it books. So it's almost like a book list, or books is what we're going to call it, which is really a book array. So a book array, or a book list, let's say, which is, we're going to use initializer syntax for this. So we're going to use open curly bracket, open square bracket, close square bracket, and we're going to initialize new book products, right? And the book needs our book model. Let's look at the book model, not this one, but actually this book model, which is what the constructor is right now. This is what it's going to need, right? So notice it needs a couple things. It needs an ID. So we're going to say ID of 1. And then we're going to call this book 1 for the name, right? And this is the next thing. Notice it bounces up here in the code hinting, author. So we're going to say author 1. And then it says published, right? And that is whether it's the year that it was published. So we're going to say, year 1. And then finally the description. So we'll say short description, followed by the price, which we're going to put in as $10, right? So we don't need any of this anymore. This is just an example of how this is done, and we're going to use this as a comma. We're going to add a bunch of books, and we're going to try and add several of them. Let's make it so that there is, I don't know, 12 or 15 of them. And we'll go in there and we'll change the numbers in a second. So how many is that? So that's 2, 3, 4. Wouldn't it be nice if you can just go in here and modify everything? And I believe you can, but it'd be nice if you can do that with some kind of shortcut. So there's 10. Let's make it so that there is 11. And we're going to kind of do the same thing with here. It's a 2, 2, 2. And you know what? Maybe we should probably put 1, 2, like that. So we know that they're different. Again, this is just placeholder data that we're typing. So that way there's nothing that can be that can say that, hey, this is the same book somehow. We want to kind of differentiate from one book to the other, and that's what we're kind of doing this, so that when we do our layout, then we can lay out our book pattern. Imagine this, we don't have a back end. Someone else is working on the front end alone, right? So we've separated concerns. Ooh, what did we do here? Oh yeah, we did 6s instead of 7s. Or 7s instead of 6s. Wouldn't that be grand if we can just copy and paste? Yeah, so what we've done is, let's suppose we've separated concerns, so someone else is working on the back end, and another group is working on the front end. You can feel that, or you can see that when we do this kind of stuff, we don't know what our data is going to look like until we start formatting it. And this is what this is. We're going to format our data and make sure that it is going to work. Is going to work good, right? And that's what this is all about. So that way, when we finally have data, then we've already done our formatting. We've already looked at what it's going to look like, and so we can figure out stuff ahead of time, right? Again, you can imagine if that's 12, 13, 14, 15, let's say. So you can imagine if we don't know what the data is going to look like. We know we want to format it. We have our model. We've been given our model, but we actually don't have the connection to the database yet. Let's say for whatever reason, maybe the database hasn't even been created, or we don't have access to it. We're going to get access right soon, but we still want to continue with the work. So this is why we do something like this. And also, creating a database connection, it takes additional work. And what this does is it makes it so that there isn't any additional work. We have a data model we can use to continue with, so we're not stuck. And that's what this is all about. Okay, so that's the first thing. This is the books array. And notice it's an array of type books, our book. And here we're going to get our first method called get books. Okay, which is of type observable, book array. I'm going to pass in the book array that we're going to get. And let's just make sure that this is like so. And then we're going to return from, and this is where you need the from. We're going to return from this dot books. All right, and that utilizes, if I'm not wrong, let's make sure the linting all works. Nice, nice. That utilizes everything we need for our static backend, static data source backend. Okay, so that's what this is. Okay, so far so good. Notice that this hasn't compiled yet, even though we've saved a bunch of times. Why? Because book model and static data source has never been accessed. It's never been referenced. No reference, no need to compile, which is what this does. All right, so that is the data source. And now what we need to put in place finally is the book repository, which again is going to go in the model folder. So again, make a new file. We're going to call this the book.repository.ts. And what a repository is in this case is it connects to the data model and the static data source in order for us to inject book data and that kind of thing. Okay. So let's keep going. We're going to say import again, injectable. We've seen this before, and it's from @Angular/core. And we're also going to import our book model from the /book model. Right, it's in the same folder, so we can do that. We're also going to import our static data source, and it's from the /static data source. All right, so that takes care of all the imports. We're going to make this @injectable. Again, it's just think about it as a decorator, right? And we're going to export our class here called our book repository. Okay, a book repository class. And this is where we're going to have all of our book data come into. And later on, when we use the HTTP service, we're going to see that this is where it's going to be at. So books, again, is going to be of type book array. And the book array we're going to initialize as an empty array. We can also use the other pattern, which is a new array of type book. You could do it this way as well. This is equivalent to doing, and this is not as preferred, by the way, in JavaScript as doing this. I mean, the same thing, right? Because if you hover over this, then you can see that that is exactly what it is, a book array. It's not going to change anything by using the other pattern. So that's kind of the way we do it. And we're also going to make our, instead of categories like we have in the PowerPoint, remember, I'm just going to split screen here again so we can see the book model. So author was our categories. We're going to split by author. If we had multiple kind of categories or authors, we would have it here. So we can kind of filter by author. And maybe what we'll do is we'll add additional books by author. So we can say, okay, I want to look by Isaac Asimov. Give me all the books by Isaac Asimov. Give me all the books, filter all the books by, eventually by year if you really want to filter by year as well. But for now, just author is good enough. So we're going to say private author, right, or authors, which is going to be a string array, which is equal to, again, an open or an empty array. And then inside of our constructor function, what we're going to do, I'm just going to make kind of one of these happen. Our constructor is not going to be empty, so I'm just going to make it kind of fill out the blanks here for us. So first of all, we want a private data source. So it's called data source, let's say. And the private data source is going to be of type static data source. So that's the first thing. And let's just close that up. It's only one that we're going to use. So again, we can probably put it on the same line. Not a problem. So what this does, again, it says like, it's almost like saying this dot data source is equal to data source. That's what that is happening right there. And then the next line is going to be, we're going to start monkeying with this kind of stuff. We're going to say that the data source in the constructor, when the constructor starts, dot get books, and we're going to subscribe because it's a subscribable, it's an observable. And again, to show you this, if we look at the data source for this, you can see that get books is an observable, right? So an observable is using the observer pattern, and what that does is the observer pattern will notify all the subscribers when a book has been received. So what this is going to do is going to push notify or send a push notification to the subscriber. So our data source, we're going to subscribe, as an example, data source itself, which is a private member of the book repository, is going to subscribe to the getBooks method, which is an observable. It's something that's going to notify, the getBooks method is going to notify all of its subscribers, anyone who subscribes to this getBooks method, to any of the new books that come into play. So if I add more books in the future, it's going to use the new books as a list. It's going to basically create an array of books, and it's going to send it to the subscribers, which is what we're doing here. Okay, so data source.getBooks, and we're going to say subscribe. We're going to use we're going to call this data, and we're going to use a fat arrow expression. Remember the fat arrow expression, what it does is like using a function, inline function. And we're going to say this dot books, right, is equal to the data. So what this is saying is, okay, take the books and fill it up with the books that we get from the static data source, right? That's what's happening. And then we're going to say that this dot authors is equal to the data dot map, and we're going to map. We're going to create a mapping between the data and the author that we're going to get from the book, each of the books. It's like doing a for each loop. So for each book in the books array, and we're going to say that we're going to filter the, we're going to create sort of category, because category was used before. We'll make it so it's that's an author, an A, right? So index, okay? And what we're going to do here is we are going to make an array index of A, which is equal to the index, and we're going to sort this array. Okay, so what does this line mean? And they talk about it a little bit in the PowerPoint. But we're doing exactly what we did with the products in the PowerPoint with authors and categories, right? So we're going to say, hey, okay, we want to make an authors array, and what we're doing is we're creating a map between the and this is P here, but really it should be book. Let's go book B, right? Because that's better. Oops, that's a better thing. So from all the book, right, to book author, whatever the book author is that we're looking at for each book author, we want to make a mapping between that author and the author's object. We want to create another author inside the author's list. That's what's happening, or the author's array, right? And what we want to do is we want to filter it so that it is sorted in sorted order. That's what's happening here, okay? So that's what that's what happens when the constructor is called for the book repository, and which only happens once. Okay, so that's what happens there. Now we're going to have a couple of utility functions. So getBooks, we can call from, we're going to say the author is going to be of type string, which is we're going to initialize to null. And this getBooks is going to return a book array. That's what's going to happen, right? And the book array is, we're going to say return this dot books, right? And we're going to filter. We're going to filter it by book author, right? For every book author that is equal to null, or the author, if you see this, is exactly equal to the book.author. So basically what we're saying here is that we want to return the books that have been filtered by author. So whatever the author that you're looking at, let's say for example Isaac Asimov or Frank Baer, maybe we're going to have other books in here, and so on. We want to be able to filter by author, and that means we're going to have to actually enter some more data later on because we don't have enough of it. Okay? So that way we have, let's say, 15 parts of data. Okay, so that is what we're going to be doing. And I'm just going to make sure that I didn't mess up the repository, because I think the repository, yeah, we did. We totally did. So So this is product 1, but this is author. Let's make it so that author 1 wrote a few books here, because that's what we're using. We're using author instead of category. And then author 2 wrote these books, right? And let's say author 3 wrote these books. And maybe we'll even say author 4 wrote those books. 4 authors, right? So 4 authors, we got a few books been written by different authors. And yeah. Okay, so that'll be, we'll save that change. And we don't care about this anymore. We care about the book repository, which is what we're writing right now. Okay. All right, so yes, we don't care about this. We can split off into this. Let's continue. So get books, that's what get books does. Get books basically says, okay, return by author the kind of the book that we're looking for, all the books that we're going to get by author. Okay. We're also going to get, we're going to overload the get books function. We can do that. We can make another get books function. So get books. But this, or get books, or individual book, those are all the books, and we can get all one book by ID. So we can send it the ID, which is a number, and we're going to look for the book as an example. And by the way, should it ID be a number, or should it be a string? And again, if you look at the book model, the book ID in this case is a number. We may change this to a string later on. For now, it's a number because that's our mock data. Okay. So that's why it's going to say number here. So book, it's going to return a specific book that we're looking at by number. We want to filter by number. And we're going to return this .books.find, and we're going to find a book where the book ID, right, is equal to the ID that we're passing into this function. And it's got to be exactly equal to by linting requirements. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. So we're looking for a specific book by ID, and we're going to return that book. That's what this does. As well as we're going to get authors, right? And we're going to return a string array. That is going to stay the same. And we're going to return this .authors. That's what we're doing here. Okay, so we're going to return books and authors. Okay, books and categories. The other thing was products and categories. This is books and authors. Okay, so pretty cool. And that kind of finishes off our setup. The last thing we need to do is set up the module that we talked about before. So inside of the model folder, we're going to make a new file, and we're going to call this file the model module. And this module is, we're going to import ng module from @Angular core. And we're also going to import our two things we just made, our book repository. We're going to get that from the /book repository. Okay. And we're also going to import our static data source, which we're going to get from the /data source. Okay, so those are the two things, and plus the ng module. So ng module, we're making a feature module here. And the feature module, like it talks about in the PowerPoint presentation, is going to allow our data to flow across the entire application if we need to. So ng module. So again, we're using a decorator to say that this option here, this is a module. We're going to use the provider's property, and we're going to say that it's an array of, that includes our book repository as well as our static data source for now. Okay, that's what it's going to include. And of course, we're going to export the class, which is going to be called the book module. Okay, and that really does everything we need there. Now again, if you notice, if I control backtick, no compilation. Why? We've never used this stuff at all, the 4 files we just made. at all in the application, so therefore there's no compilation required. Okay, so that again, at this point in the video, we're just set up our model so we can pass data into the bookstore. Okay, we're going to stop there, and in the next video, we're going to start the store, the bookstore itself, by connecting to the book model and the repository and the data source. Okay, so see you in the next video.